So we've talked about the smallest levels of organization in the animal body, cells and tissues. These tissues are organized into organs, which are organized into organ systems. There are 11 different organ systems found in most vertebrates, but not all animals have all these different systems. We are going to talk about several of them more specifically in this class, but we won't get to talk about every system that's found in the human body. Our organ systems are not working in isolation. They are often working together and affecting one another. For example, if you encounter a threat, it is detected by your nervous system, which then may send a signal to your musculoskeletal system, causing you to move away. The nervous system will also send signals to your circulatory system, causing your heart rate to go up. It also sends signals to your respiratory system, increasing your breathing rate. This communication between organ systems is important for maintaining homeostasis, which again is the regulation of our internal environment. For many variables in our body, like temperature or hormone levels, there is an ideal set point. The organ systems work together to keep the body close to that set point. They do this using something called a negative feedback loop. So what is a negative feedback loop? You can think of it similar to a thermostat. First, the body detects a change in a variable. If we're talking about a thermostat here, the thermostat detects the temperature is above or below the temperature you set. When it detects a change, it triggers a response. So the thermostat may turn on the heat if it's too cold, or the air conditioning if it's too hot. That response causes a change in the variable, hopefully bringing it back to the set point. Then the thermostat is ready to detect the next time the temperature changes above or below the set point. In the body, sensors are anything that detects changes to variables. These might be things like cell receptors or nerves that pick up on some kind of change in the body. In the thermostat example, the thermostat is the sensor. An effector is what is triggered or released to bring the variable back into equilibrium. In the body, this may be something like muscles or glands. In the thermostat example, the heat or air conditioning is the effector that turns on when the sensor detects a change. So let's look at an example of a negative feedback loop in the human body. Let's talk about how we maintain our blood sugar. In the human body, cells in the pancreas detect when our blood sugar gets too low or too high. So the pancreas is the sensor. If the blood sugar gets too high, the pancreas is triggered to release insulin. Insulin is the effector here because it brings the blood sugar back down to normal. If blood sugar is too low, the pancreas instead triggers release of a different effector, glucagon, which increases the blood sugar. These effectors cause a change, hopefully bringing our blood sugar back into the normal range. And the pancreas is ready to detect when blood sugar fluctuates again so it can respond and help us maintain homeostasis. But sometimes we actually need our body to temporarily get away from a set point to respond to something. In this case, we have positive feedback loops. An example of a positive feedback loop is blood clotting when we get a cut. Most of the time, we don't want our blood to clot in our blood vessels, so negative feedback loops keep that in check. But when we have damage to a blood vessel, we want clotting to increase there to seal up the cut. When blood vessels are damaged, they trigger the release of blood clotting molecules. These blood clotting molecules trigger more blood clotting molecules to be released. So if the set point is a low level of these molecules, you can see that we're getting further and further from that set point. However, once the blood clot forms and the cut is sealed, negative feedback loops are triggered to bring the system back into check. But not all animals regulate all of the same variables in their bodies, and they don't all do it in the same way. For each variable, an animal may be either a regulator or a conformer. A regulator for a particular variable maintains that variable within a narrow range of conditions. A conformer does not have a set point for that variable. Instead, it fluctuates with the external conditions. We are regulators for body temperature. If our temperature gets below 98.6 degrees, we start producing heat to warm ourselves up. If we get too warm, we start to sweat to cool down. We are endotherms because we can produce heat to maintain our body temperature. But cold-blooded animals, or ectotherms, are conformers for body temperature. They can't produce their own heat, so when it gets cold outside, their body temperature drops. There are pros and cons to both strategies. An endotherm can maintain its body temperature and keep all its organ systems working well, regardless of whether it's a little too hot or a little too cold. But they have to use up energy to do this. An ectotherm uses less energy because it's not producing all this heat or trying to cool itself, but it may not be able to be very active in the cold. For endotherms, there is a range of temperatures where they do not need to expend much energy to maintain their ideal body temperature. For most endotherms, that range is around 27 to 36 degrees Celsius. But take a look at this graph. On the x-axis, we have the temperature, and on the y-axis, we have the metabolic rate of our two animals, the cat and the lizard. You can think of the metabolic rate as how much energy the animal is using. The lizard uses very little energy, and it only increases slightly as the temperature goes up. However, it can't use much energy at all when it's very cold, which also probably means it can't move around very much. For the cat, though, as it gets colder, it has to use a lot more energy to generate heat and maintain its body temperature. The same thing happens if the temperature gets too high. However, regulators can't maintain their set points in all external conditions. Even regulators for temperature can be affected if the outside temperature is too high or too low. For us, if the temperature is too low and we can't maintain our body temperature, we might enter hypothermia. If it's too high, we might enter hyperthermia. Now pause the video and answer these three questions. Many regulators have different ways of regulating body temperature. One way is to have some physical protection from the cold. This may be having a large body size to protect from cold, or a large surface area to release heat if it's very hot. Animals who live in cold climates might also have a thick layer of insulation to protect their bodies from the cold. For example, walruses have a thick layer of blubber that helps insulate them. Animals may also use behavior to regulate their body temperature. So if it's hot, you might get in the shade to cool off. Or if it's cold, you might start to shiver or put on a coat. Squirrels and a lot of other mammals have an interesting behavior they do when it's hot called splooting. They sprawl themselves on a cool surface to help dispel heat from their bodies. Temperature may also be regulated through physiological processes. When we get too hot, blood rushes to the capillaries in our skin, so heat can be released from our bodies. But when we get too cold, blood moves away from the skin to avoid losing heat. And finally, there are processes at the cellular level that can help regulate body temperature. One example is brown adipose tissue in humans. This type of tissue is found in much larger amounts in infants than in adults. Because infants are so small, it's more difficult for them to maintain their body temperature. This special tissue is a type of fat, but instead of producing ATP when it is broken down, it produces heat. So it gives infants an extra way to produce heat and keep their body temperature from dropping too low. Another important variable that many animals need to regulate is the water level in their bodies. Animals can increase the water in their bodies in several different ways. Of course, they can do so by drinking or by eating foods that contain water. However, many can also take in water through osmosis. Amphibians are a good example. They can actually take in water through their skin. We haven't gone over cellular respiration yet, but if you remember from lab, water is one of the byproducts of cellular respiration. So that is another way animals increase the water in their bodies. Animals can also lose water in 4 different ways. Urination and defecation are the main ones for most mammals, but many animals can also lose water through evaporation and osmosis. We humans can lose water through evaporation when we sweat. So why is water regulation so important? Well, it's crucial our cells have the right balance so they can function well. Osmoregulation is the regulation of water balance by controlling the concentrations of dissolved solutes that influence osmosis. So movement of water across cell membranes is very important for maintaining the right balance of different solutes, like salts and sugars, inside and outside of the cell. Now answer this question. Go back to the first lecture, Biology Basics, if you need a refresher.